way you feel inspired and motivated to bring about change in your community. So we're going to jump into this day because it is all about you. Our very first speaker, we are so excited to have her here today. Anna Enti Asari Tubbs is a writer, teacher, and PhD student. She holds a master's in multidisciplinary gender studies from the University of Cambridge and a bachelor's in medical anthropology from Stanford University. Anna's research, writing, and talks are centered on gender and race issues in the U.S., especially as they relate to youth, politics, and popular culture. She is currently pursuing her PhD in sociology at the University of Cambridge as a Bill and Melinda Gates Scholar. She recently accepted her first book deal, and she is also the first partner of Stockton. Please help me welcome Anna.
Thank you so much, Annie. I'm just going to raise this up a teeny bit more. I'm really tall. That was one of the best pronunciations of my name ever. Good job. It's a hard one. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Woo! Yeah, ready to get started? It's going to be fun. Okay, so I'm really excited that I get to be your first speaker today, and I'm happy that I get to go first because you have a lot of amazing people coming, so I don't have to fill their shoes. It's nice to kind of set the bar, which will be fun. And I'm just going to get started with 3 stories. So these are 3 stories about 3 different Black women who changed the course of world history, but whose names you likely have not heard. And before I share their stories, I'll also say I'm going to leave some time at the very end if you want to ask any questions. If you're thinking about questions as we go along, that's perfect. The first story. Starts in a small village on the island of Grenada. It starts when a young Black girl, unfortunately, is raped by a Scottish man. She was only about 12 years old. When she decides to carry the child that she conceives, and she gives birth to her, she names her Louise. The story continues. Louise is born with lighter skin than the rest of her family members, and as a result, she grows up despising the circumstances of her conception. She does everything in her power to profess her Black pride. In school, she learns to speak 3 languages, and at the young age of 17, she has a desire to join an activist movement around the world, and she boards a steamship on her own to Canada. Here she joins a movement against oppression called the Marcus Garvey Pan-African Movement. Has anybody here heard of Marcus Garvey or the Pan-African Movement? A few hands, okay. All you need to know is that it's very radical. They're all about Black pride. She travels across the US throughout her life, spreading the message of Black liberation and unity. And she gives birth to 8 children. One of them is named Malcolm Little, who later changes his name to Malcolm X. And this is only a glimpse into the life story of Louise Little, Malcolm X's mother. Feel free to join us and take a seat wherever. Great to see you. The second story starts in Atlanta, Georgia. It begins with the pastor and first lady of the Ebenezer Baptist Church. Has anyone ever visited the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta? You've been to Atlanta? Okay, if you ever have the chance, you should go. These 2 people, the first lady and pastor, teach their congregation the importance of faith and social justice. They preach a message of Black dignity and the need to stand up for our rights. In these messages, they raise their only surviving daughter, a daughter by the name of Alberta. And she goes on to become an incredible musician. She wants to be a teacher. She gets the education she needs to become a teacher. But at the time when she gets married, it's against the law for married women to teach. And therefore, she has to give up her career in order to have a family. She uses her teaching to teach her community, to teach her children. She joins the NAACP, the YMCA, and she delivers speeches all over the country. In her life, she gives birth to 3 children, one of whom is named Michael King. Does anybody know who Michael King is? Any guesses? Okay, I'll let you know who it is. He later changed his name to Martin Luther King Jr. Now, this is only a glimpse into the life story of Alberta King, MLK Jr.'s mother. The final story begins on the eastern shore of Maryland. It begins when a young couple by the names of Alfred and Leah start their family in the 1880s. Now, by the early 1900s, they already had 9 children together, 4 of whom had survived, and they were awaiting their latest child. Leah Esther unfortunately passed away in December of 1902. It's the same year and month that her last daughter, was born. And that indicates to us researchers that she likely, unfortunately, passed away in childbirth. Again, from one of the most painful experiences emerges one of the most beautiful souls, a young woman named Emma Burtis. She fell in love with poetry, and she had dreams of going on to do bigger things than her small town could offer her. She joined thousands in the Great Migration. Who here can tell me what the Great Migration is? Yeah.
It's when many African Americans moved to the South and left towards northern cities and better opportunities.
Awesome, thank you so much. Let's snap for that participation, really appreciate it. So in case you didn't hear him, it's when thousands of African Americans moved from the South towards northern cities for better opportunities. That was a great summary. She became a woman who believed in love above all else, and she believed in the acceptance of people. In this loving environment, she raises 9 children, her first being a boy who not only resembled her the most physically, but who also took after her passion and her talent for writing. This boy would become known to the world as James Baldwin. So I share, and like I said, this is only a glimpse into the story of Burtis Baldwin, James Baldwin's mother. I share the stories of Louise, Alberta, and Burtis for a few different reasons. Number one, I just think they're absolutely fascinating and they deserve to be told, and hopefully you agree with me. Number 2, they're the subjects of my PhD research. And 3, they display the importance of telling our own stories because others will not. Hence the hashtag for this talk, Tell Our Story. And I'm going to explain that more as I go on today. I believe telling their stories matters because without understanding their stories, we're missing huge pieces of the puzzle. We forget how intertwined the civil rights movement was with each of these women, and how intertwined each of us here today are as a result of that. We erase their contributions. And in a room full of storytellers, which we're in today, it's crucial to draw attention to stories that are being erased, misrepresented, or silenced. These introductions that I gave you are just the tip of the iceberg for the incredible lives that each of these women led. But I can't give you everything today because I have a book coming out in 2021 and you have to buy it. But hopefully I reeled you in and you're like, I want to know more about these women. I will say though that I have uncovered so many incredible details about their lives. And I'm sure you can see just from those introductions where their sons got their ideas from, their courage, and their approach to solving issues. Putting their lives together is incredibly inspiring for me, but to be honest, it's really frustrating as well. Every single day, I become more aware of how little I know about them. The more I know, it's almost like the less that I know. It's annoying and frustrating to me that I didn't know their names sooner, and I hope you all kind of feel that frustration a bit as well. It's a similar frustration I felt when I saw the movie Hidden Figures. Who here has seen Hidden Figures? All of us, almost all of us, or read the book. You might relate to my feeling. When I left the theater, I was of course inspired by these 3 women. They're incredible. But I was a lot more upset because I'd never knew their names before. Names that could have meant so much to me as a young Black woman, that would have meant so much to me as a young Black girl. And I wondered, why had their story been kept? Why was it hidden? And that's one of the questions I want you guys to keep from this talk. Why is that story being kept? Why is it being hidden? So out of the many problems that exist in this world, much of my work is based on those questions. This withholding of information, especially as it concerns young people, women, and women of color more specifically. Too often, our stories are kept from the spotlight, credit for our work is given to others, and we are misrepresented. It's the problem that I address not only in my academic work, but when I shine light on the women of Stockton through research that is targeted at understanding their unique needs and their unique issues and their unique contributions. It's also what I do when I work with my young people, my students, on their college essays, and remind them, and hopefully remind each of you today, of the worth of your voices. And when I write about Alberta, Bertus, and Louise. I could have honored their lives even more, however, if the following were true. Number one, if they had kept better record of their own lives. In other words, if each of these three women had seen themselves as being worth memorializing. Number two, if they'd lived in a time where they had control over their narrative, perhaps in a time where social media was available to them. And if those who met their sons had paid more attention to the credit they gave their mothers. All three of these men were well aware of the role that their mothers played in their lives, and they actually talked about it all the time. But those who listened decided to just ignore that part of the story. So another question I have for you all is, what parts of the story are we ignoring? I'm first going to address how the women themselves contributed to their own erasure, which is a hard thing to tackle, but it's true. I'm going to first emphasize that quite a lot of the time, young people, women of color, are told to practice humility, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not saying you shouldn't be humble, but I also think that we can celebrate ourselves and our work and share our stories while maintaining our humility. Because in many ways, that approach to our work is doing a disservice to everyone who comes after us. And a clear example of this comes from comparing two American heroes. Who can tell me who this is? Let's go right here. Harriet Tubman, great job. Harriet Tubman, and I'm going to compare her to Frederick Douglass. So for Frederick Douglass, we have access to quite a few resources. He has several books that he wrote, like several, that's amazing. But for Harriet Tubman, we have relatively little in comparison. The fact that it's taking until this year for us to get a biopic on her is crazy, but everyone, we gotta go watch that movie when it comes out. But one reason for this is because Douglass was very aware of the need to control his own narrative. Scholars say that he was almost obsessed with it. Harriet Tubman was less focused on telling her story than she was on performing her works. Ladies, does that ring true to anybody here? Snap if it does, you can. Douglass shows us that one does not need to be sacrificed for the other. And in fact, our work travels even further when there is record of it. When those who come later can learn from us and can hear about our own interpretations of our work. We should share our motivations, our own journeys, and our changing mindsets. And I want all of you to do that. You're never too young to start doing that. Because unfortunately, and this is especially true for the most marginalized, others will quite often tell our story wrong, if they tell it at all. So that brings me to my next point. Beyond the fact that all of us in this room should be more willing to speak about our work, take credit for our accomplishments, while shining light on all those who contributed to our journeys, because none of us arrived here alone. Even today, none of you got here alone, I don't think. Well, it could have happened. To illustrate this next point, I want to share a tiny bit more about my own story, parts of which have already come up in my bio, just a quick little summary. That's me still. I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Through my parents' jobs as lawyers who practice internationally, I was given the immense privilege of growing up in places like Dubai, Estonia, Sweden, Mexico, Azerbaijan, Ghana. I went to boarding school in Indiana for my last 2 years of high school when my parents decided they were going to go abroad again. I'm proud to have earned my bachelor's degree, I'm proud of my master's, and I'm proud now to be pursuing my PhD as a young Black woman. As was stated, I recently accepted my first book deal, which is a dream come true for me, and I'm hoping several more books will come out in the future. I'm a counselor to high school students, one of my proudest accomplishments, and I'm also a consultant for companies. I'm about to become a mother in 2 weeks or so, very soon. Thank you. And I am the daughter of 2 parents who taught me to be strong, to be independent, to work for what I wanted to achieve. And most importantly, both my parents taught me to take control of my narrative. This is just a summary of my story. Yet quite often, as a young Black woman, my story has been reduced. I've been called a trophy wife. I've been called dumb. I've been treated like I'm less than. In other words, I've been underestimated because of my gender, my race, the high pitch in my voice, my looks, sometimes even because I'm kind. But I refuse to let these misinterpretations become my narrative. And I want you all to think about ways in which you've been misrepresented and how you're going to fight back against that. For a long time, especially when I was younger, I didn't feel comfortable directly addressing that. I would not have said those sentences. Because again, I was taught, be humble, not by my parents, but by everybody else around me. But I'm really grateful that my confidence has grown through realizing that I'm not alone in this experience. As young people from all different backgrounds here today, I'm sure there are many of you who can relate. And if you relate to any of these, I just want you to give me some snaps. It helps me to know. Many of you whose voices have been ignored. Many of you who have been underestimated. Many of you who have been told it wasn't your time. Maybe you were denied an opportunity because of your gender or the color of your skin. Maybe you were told you were too assertive, too strong, too something else. All right, good. There's a lot of us in here. So I'm going to tell you how I handle this issue of erasure and misrepresentation when I face it personally. Hopefully it'll be helpful. I've chosen to tell my side of the story. Because standing up for myself also means standing up for other young women of color. For example, if I were quiet when my narrative was being warped to fit these sexist and racist beliefs, my own students might silence themselves as well. And I just can't accept that. Furthermore, I handle this issue by highlighting other people's stories that I believe are due recognition. So before I close, I want to leave you all with a few questions to reflect on. I believe you've already been asked the following, if not you'll be asked at some point today, to identify a problem in the world that you want to change/fix. You've been challenged to think about content that you can create, which is another way of saying stories you can share that shine a light on that issue. And you've also been asked, what are you waiting for? I'm going to add some questions of my own that might help you further. What stories are being kept from the spotlight? Why are they being hidden? What difference can you make by sharing stories that would otherwise be forgotten and erased? Who is in charge of telling your story? And by finding your own ability to take control of your narrative, how can you highlight others who are misrepresented, forgotten, excluded? And finally, how does this inclusion help you define who you are? I hope that these words and these women's stories encourage you to continue your work, but to also write your stories down, stories that include your background and the people who helped you get to where you are today, to share your story with your own audiences, and to highlight each other's work. Take control of your story. If you are young, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, basically if you're not the hegemony, you owe it to yourselves and to all of us who are in community with you to make sure that your work is accurately represented, but more importantly, that you represent others as well. And I'm going to end with a quote by Alice Walker, and that brings me back to my research that I started with. In her essay titled In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, she writes the following. I'll let you take a read. Our mothers and grandmothers, moving to music not yet written, and they waited. They waited for a day when the unknown thing that was in them would be made known, but guessed somehow in their darkness that on the day of their revelation, they would be long dead. Don't worry, that's not where it ends. That'd be very dramatic. But this is not the end of the story. For all the young women, our mothers and grandmothers, ourselves, have not perished in the wilderness. And if we ask ourselves why, and search for and find the answer, we will know beyond all efforts to erase it from our minds just exactly who and of what we Black women are. This quote summarizes the way in which a storyteller, through highlighting stories that would otherwise have been forgotten, saves not only the people at the center of the story, but they help to save themselves and their own audience members. Knowing Bertus, Louise, and Alberta's stories helps me to better know myself. Their story is intertwined with my own. And if these mothers are forgotten, others will be too. I will be too. So what stories must you tell? Who and what must you save? Thank you. Thank you all, you're wonderful audience. I would love to hear your questions if you have any, or comments, or anything that could be helpful for you as you go on into this day. You're going to have so much learning. I'm jealous. I can't stay all day long. We're going to hear from some incredible people today. So if there's anything I can provide, or any questions you have, now's a great time for that. Yes?
How long did you study this?
How long did I study this book particularly? This is my second year writing about these particular women, but I would say that it's been building up throughout my life, especially because I had such a strong mother myself. And I started to really think about the ways in which patriarchy highlights men so often, and that we're missing all of the surrounding players in that story. So some from my personal experience, but just these three women I started 2 years ago. Yeah, great question. Any other questions? Oh yeah.
Where did you learn about these 3 women?
Where did I learn about them? How did I find out about them? That's a great question. I started first by, I knew after I watched Hidden Figures, actually, which media can have such a big impact, right? That's what we're all here to talk about today. I started to think how many more stories are being hidden, and I want to be someone who contributes to showing these and unveiling these stories. So I knew I was going to write about Black women who were being hidden when I went into my doctoral work, but I was very vague, and that was obviously like there's millions that I could have chosen from. But then I started to become more concerned with this whole notion of the woman behind the man, which I hate that saying. I'd rather say the woman in front of or the woman beside of at the very least. But I started to think about the woman before the man. Because all of us came from a mother and a woman, and therefore I started to get really excited about thinking about some of the most influential men who I really honor and love as heroes, but who I knew through their kind of being highlighted, that everyone around them who was not in the spotlight was being erased. And as soon as I started looking into these women's stories, I mean, someone asked me once, how did you know it was going to be interesting? How did I know it was going to be interesting to write about a black woman in the, in the early 1900s? It was obvious. They were going to be interesting. And so I really wish I could share even more details with you all today, but my editor has told me I need to stop sharing facts about the book. So they will come out later, but you're in for a ride. They live these incredible lives. Great question. Any other questions? Yeah. It's going to be called, well, right now it's called The Three Mothers, but that might change. Yeah. But I'll keep you posted. Thanks for asking. Anything else? Yeah. Oh, you guys have great questions.
How do you recommend like moving forward when people underestimate you based off of looks or prior judgments?
Absolutely. I mean, the first thing she asked, how would you recommend that you move forward when people misjudge you or like make assumptions based off looks or whatever prior judgments? The first thing, when I was younger, some people would tell me that I needed to like lower my voice in order to be better respected, or that I needed to change something about me. And I'm happy that from the beginning I rejected that notion. I think it's more that everybody else just needs to change their mindset. If you see a woman who like has a high voice, you should not automatically say, I'm not gonna respect her. And instead just prove them wrong. That's kind of my attitude on most things in life. And highlighting more of us. Because when I felt that this was an individual thing, that it was just me, like, oh, woe is me, I have this high voice and people are misjudging me for it, there was only so far I could get. But when I started to realize that so many of us were being misjudged for who we were, simply because of who we were, parts of our identity or how we presented ourselves, I realized it's a lot, actually less work for all of us to just keep being who we are and being proud of it. Yeah. I like your questions a lot. You're giving me so many great ones. Any others? Maybe one more. Don't be nervous. Don't be shy. Anything? Okay. Oh, a couple went up. I saw that. We're going to get it. Mm-hmm.
So, as a mom of 4,
Wow.
how are you planning to incorporate your new motherhood with all of these exciting things that you're doing and your own journey with motherhood?
Yeah, it's been, sorry, I have a cold. It's been a really beautiful experience to be writing about motherhood as I'm becoming a mother. Really crazy timing. But I would say that hearing from these women and knowing their stories and their approaches to raising such incredible children, not only their sons, but all the other children that they raised as well, gives me a lot of guidance, especially in a time in our world where there is still so much left to change. And I'm reminded of that on a daily basis. On one hand, of course, I'm not having my child in the 1920s, which is a whole other level of fear, especially for a black mother. But I can still take so much from their strategies and their approach to motherhood that were so different from each other. And so that's one way. So learning from the ways in which they taught their children, even from things like when they would go to school, they'd come back and ask them, what did you learn? And they would almost reteach them from their perspective. And I think as well, just the notion that all three of them were very supportive of whatever their kids wanted to do, so long as they came back to a social justice lens or came back to an understanding of who they were in this world and how they could make a difference to help others, that none of them were any better than any other person. So I think that's the main part that I'll be taking from it. Yeah, and then that last one over here, I saw that hand.
So you talked about all the different aspects that you have to your life.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that, and then now becoming a mother, how are you like balancing all of the different aspects of your life?
That's a good question. Balance is so important. For me, I, at this point, only take on things that I really want to do. I think at this point, luckily having the privilege of doing that, that's not always something that we all have the opportunity to do. But when you reach a point in your career that you can start to make decisions about, is this thing something that fits my mindset for giving to other people? Is this thing something that is giving life back to me? Is this thing something I agree with? Then so much of it really comes together under like one umbrella thing. Because as much as it can be broken down, yes, I'm a counselor and a consultant and I write and I'm a student and whatever, all of that for me is a journey of being on the road to talking about race and gender and inclusivity. So I kind of see them all working together. And I would say that in my own personal life, that's quite intertwined as well. Especially with my husband's position as the mayor of Stockton, and what work I can bring to that. So doing the research on the women of Stockton felt just like a natural thing for me to add. And that's not to say that I don't get overwhelmed sometimes. I'm definitely going to take my maternity leave and focus on my child and just kind of see how it all fits together. But I think if you can reach a point in your life where you get to choose what you're doing, those are the kinds of questions to ask yourself. Is this contributing to the larger thing that I feel that I'm a part of? And is this giving back to me in a way that is productive so that I can sustain this and continue to love my family and love my community? Great. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Let me step over this so that way neither one of us trips. If we could please give Anna one more round of applause. Thank you so much. All right. If you are feeling inspired, please post your thoughts at the Rep Project. Here are the hashtags. We're going to take a brief break. If we can have everybody back here in about 10 minutes, we'll go into our next session. Thank you so much.